from World War II up until the time when you began in the parish, what actually happened in the parish at that time? What ministries were done and undertaken?
Well, I think it's true to say that they had, for instance, in the 30s, they had a very good football club.
Okay.
And that was really quite an impressive thing. There's a photograph of that in the history. But yes, they had good youth work there. Then they had, for instance, they always ran their own house party at Upwey. They didn't join the League of Youth. Like that, it was always the St Colum's house party.
Oh, really?
And oh yes, they were always quite exclusive in that sense.
Yes.
One of the great features of the year in the press was Hospital Sunday, the Lord Mayor's Hospital Sunday appeal, you see. And this was always featured in the press. And of course, year after year, including my own day, I can say too, the biggest Anglican contribution came from St Colum's Hawthorne. You know, it'd usually be St Colum's Hawthorne, St John's Tarack, and then the cathedral.
Mm.
And now that was the sort of tradition that it was a tradition of care for people, and I always thought it was very typical at the time of the Darwin cyclone devastation there and everything else. The giving came from this parish was really quite outstanding. I was amazed that so much money came. And they had a great sort of sense of responsibility, civic responsibility. There's no doubt about that. And yet, at the same time, it's very interesting that the local Hawthorne City Council, they didn't ever recognise them. It's, for instance, for years, with civic services, they always went to the civic service at St John's, Camberwell. They didn't ever go to either of the Hawthorne parishes. St Colum's was a sort of downtown church by that stage. And
Yes.
as the history of course says, after the wars, they lost a lot of support. They went up to St Mark's and St John's, Camberwell, and to Holy Trinity Kew because they were more upmarket churches. See, St Colum's became very much the church down amongst the shops. It wasn't really quite the proper place to be.
Oh, instead of the church among the houses, the large houses.
That's right. And the large, well, there were originally large houses here and there within the parish, but the large houses were up there on the heights towards Camberwell, so they went to the Camberwell churches when they became established. And of course, to Holy Trinity Kew. St Mark's was always a place that drained a few people, drew people that had not been parishioners of ours, but they were not interested. They went to St Mark's, they lived in our parish. And then, of course, as far as Holy Trinity Kew is concerned, you see, when people went to Holy Trinity Kew, including Professor Weston Baton and his wife, who were great identities. They'd come from St John's, Tarack originally, but they were great strength. However, once again, Holy Trinity Kew became the thing.
I must admit, John, in my day, that the movement of people between the parishes in the Kew, Camberwell, Hawthorne area, is still an ongoing concern for all the vicars.
Oh, yes. Marsh Campbell. They lost quite a lot of their youth group to St Hilary's Kew.
Yes.
And after all, this is the sort of thing we've been putting up with at St Colum's for a long time. I mean, they were drifting up to St John's, Camberwell, St Mark's, Camberwell, and St Hilary's Kew, because that's where they had the big youth work. And of course, at St Hilary's, I used to say, they had a kayak for every member. Well, I remember driving past St Hilary's Kew one day, and they had, literally a dozen kayaks stacked up, point up, against the parish hall. You know, I mean, you couldn't compete.
How wise do you think the diocese has been in building these major churches within reasonable proximity of each other? It strikes me that what we've done is transfer a lot of people between the churches depending on which is healthy and which isn't so healthy at any particular time, rather than actually necessarily seeing people in our parish as one for Christ.
I think that was right. I don't think, as far as I can tell, within the diocese, even although we had Charles Perry to begin with and so on, we didn't have a great evangelical emphasis at all. It was always low church in the early days. There was a great mission to Melbourne by an English evangelist in 1920s, but I've never heard of anything else apart from the American evangelical efforts that have been staged from time to time. So that I don't think, you see, remember, you had Perry, then you had Field Flowers Go.
That's right.
And he's the one that Jim Grant always likes to recalling. His prayer was, Lord, don't let anything happen today.
Yes.
And in fact, nothing did happen, you know. But then, of course, they had Morehouse, the great, really the great leader, but he became very much the civic leader. He used to have meetings in the Melbourne Town Hall. They used to pack them. He was you know, the classic broad churchman, a good scholar, but no evangelism at all, as far as I can tell. And but then, of course, the man that followed him, he'd been, I'll think of him in a minute, but he'd been a Keswick speaker, and he apparently was a brilliant preacher. And as far as I can tell, that's the only time, apart from Perry, that the place has ever been, that the diocese has ever been evangelised, and, you know, the thought of personal salvation being emphasised. That's as far as I can tell. Yes, well, as we know from the League of Youth, you see there were some pretty strong movements there amongst the young in the 1930s. And in World War II years, that's when CMS or the League of Youth winning people for Christ. You know?
So it sounds to me like what was happening, that quite apart from the official structures of the diocese, the evangelicals went and did evangelism anyway. So other institutions were set up, like the League of Youth or the Belgrade Heights Convention.
That's right.
Or Ridley College would be an example of that. Even the Bible College of Victoria, of course, with C.H. Nash.
That's right.
Yes. So it just blossomed anyway. But the Anglican Church, the Church of England at that time, couldn't contain it.
Yes,
So,
yes, exactly. Well, this is what the historians generally have said, that Sydney was notable for its the evangelicals were notable, the clergy were the notable evangelicals. Melbourne, the laymen were the notable evangelicals.
What was the parish like when you got there? What had you inherited?
Well, it was certainly very tired. You see, Bill Fleming had been there, and he'd had a bad war. He'd been a prisoner of war, the Japanese, and so on. And well, uh, uh, things were very well, comparatively flat. There's no doubt about that. Yes, and for instance, I had come from Williamstown, where we had a Sunday school of 300, and they were, and they all came, mainly because there were not many cars, even in those days, for Williamstown people. But, you know, when I came to St Columns, I was staggered to find that there were only about 20 or 30 in the Sunday school, and I wanted to buy all sorts of aids and things like that. They didn't even have a stand to hang charts on or anything like that, which in those days were basic.
Yeah.
But no, we'd never had them, and therefore we were not going to have them at all. And I was really pretty shattered. And they were used to running their own show. I admittedly had been spoiled down in Williamstown, and anything the vicar wanted or anything he said, that was right, you know. Although, I mean, I don't want to make you jealous, but that's what happened in those days, and actually was said. But the impression was that, well, they had good laymen there, several of them they could preach. That really the only reason they had a vicar was that was the tradition of the church, that you had to employ a man who'd been ordained, and so on. And it was a very big shock to me to know that I was not needed.
Yes. Yes.
But however, I settled down to that, and I found that those people, good lay people, they had been wonderful church supporters, and this was the way they ran their parish. But it was very difficult to introduce anything new. Very difficult indeed. Made one or two changes, I forget what they were in the service and everything else, and it was really very suspect, you know. And but eventually, of course, they became very loyal, and you know, reappointed me a couple of times and things like that. But once again, they'd become used to me. I suppose I'd become used to them, and I think that was the trouble. I think we'd become used to each other. I don't think there was, and I realised that there was nothing much happening there. I knew that, and sort of ran special services, and they were always packed. But
Yes.
it was not really a parish in the going sense.
What do you mean by that, John?
Well, there was nothing new happening, in spite of the fact that, well, even if you could, we had Peter Crawford there. Now, Peter Crawford, as I told you on the phone, he gave himself completely to the work. He really was a wonderful organiser and everything else. And of course, during that time, we had the Shilton mission to celebrate the anniversary, the 100th anniversary of the parish, and so on. And life in the 80s, 1980 that was. And well, you know, in spite of the fact that he worked, and it's true to say that I worked, and there were quite a number of people that were working for that mission. In actual fact, nothing really happened. And it was, well, it was very perplexing.
You did so put a lot of work into evangelism, but there wasn't much response
That's right.
to it. Yeah.
And as I say, downplaying my part, I'm saying that Peter Crawford was there. He was the classic. He and well, and Lan Chilton and had run many missions over
That's
in New
right.
Zealand and so on. And no, there was no response. Oh, a few people certainly responded and renewed their faith and so on. So that it just didn't ever take off. And so that was obviously a disappointment.
I suspect that you're underplaying your ministry, because I think what other people have said is that you actually helped to stop the parish from going into decline terminally.
Yes, I might have held it. I might have held it without anything spectacular.
Gave it some life, I believe.
No, I wouldn't say that, but I think, of course, my great emphasis was on preaching.
Yes.
And, I think that that might have been a help.
How did you preach? What did you preach on? How did you design your teaching series?
Yes, well, for instance, I gave a great deal of emphasis on the Old Testament, and you see, a lot of people would say, as I found Williamstown too, we hadn't heard things like this for years and everything else. Okay, I emphasis on the personalities in the Old Testament as well as in the New, and I found that they used to respond very well to that sort of thing. But then, as far as the preaching plan was concerned, I was very much the the old traditionalist. See, I used to go along with the seasons. I picked up from my Cambridge days the great excitement that you could build up with the coming of Pentecost, and with the notable seasons of the year. For instance, Advent, great emphasis on the Advent message, and of course the people that we had quite a number of the Catholic Apostolic Church in those days.
Okay.
See, as they do or did at St John's, Wells, and Mark's, and several parishes around, they were very strong in that. Well, of course, they'd lap it up when it came to the Advent and so on. But as I say, my main program was based on the seasons.
What would a typical week look like for you in the parish at St Colin's?
There'd be Sunday, because in those days we had St Aidan's, and we'd have St Aidan's we had the 8 o'clock service. Then we had St Aidan's at 9:30, and St Colin's at 11, and then baptisms usually were in the afternoon, not in the traditional way of those days.
Yes.
And then the 7 o'clock service. The 7 o'clock service was, of course, usually fairly well attended for St Colin's, because you see, we had the music. The choir was so good that they sang an anthem at every service, except when it's a communion service. The communion services were only every second Sunday.
Okay.
In those days.
In the evening.
No, this is in the morning.
Oh, I see. Okay.
At 11 o'clock. They were always at 8, of course.
Yeah.
But every second Sunday. That was fairly typical in the diocese,
Yes.
And of course, it's something that I would still think was very desirable indeed. There's no emphasis that I've been able to find in the taking of the communion service these days, simply because it's so general. But,
What do you mean by that?
well,
Yes.
well, I'm really saying that men who are gifted men and so on, they just rattle through it in the same way as Anglo-Catholics used to in my younger days. You know, there was a man who was curate at, permanent curate at St. Peter's Eastern Hill, and his great boast was that he could get to the prayer of consecration in 7 minutes flat. You know.
Oh my goodness. From the Book of Common Prayer.
In the Book of Common Prayer. And therefore I really believe that if you have the service of morning and evening prayer, or morning prayer as an alternative, or shall we say, one of the more modern services, such as people do have today, I think that I think it's a great mistake to try to combine all this modern, you know, 7-Eleven stuff with the communion service. I don't think that's what the communion service is about. We're not sort of slap happy at that stage. We're there reverently remembering a sacrifice that was made not for the jollity of the community, but for redemption. And so that I think that, to me, is a great pity.
That sounds like a very busy Sunday.
Oh, well, that was a fairly hectic Sunday.
Was Monday your day off?
Well, Monday was my day off, but you see, I had post-ordination training every second Monday.
Yes, you could have, yes.
So I didn't have Monday off really, but however, that was all right. I felt that, as it was, I spent a lot of time out of the parish, and that very well, that was my day off really. And of course you can do that when you're a single man, and when you're then, at that stage, comparatively young or vigorous, but then, okay, Tuesday morning, school, teaching two classes, there are 2 sessions, then visiting in the afternoon, and usually, well, a vestry meeting be at I would be on a Tuesday night normally, but not every Sunday, of course, not every Tuesday. Yeah. But then after that, Wednesday, an early morning celebration at 7 o'clock, which I was...
Early morning?
Yeah,
7 a.m. Yep.
every Wednesday, and every Saints' Day, celebration at 7 o'clock. And then the Wednesday communion service in the chapel, that was always at 11.
A.m., I presume? Yes.
11 a.m., yes, 11 a.m. And then Bible study in the vicarage at night. Thursday, again down to the other school down in South Hawthorne.
Auburn South Primary School.
Yes, Auburn South Primary, which of course was a delight to teach. And I've never had such response there because it was a wonderfully run school. Do you go down there by the chance?
Oh, we've got a team down there. I don't teach there.
Oh, you don't teach?
But we do have a team down there.
Oh, it was really very good and right on the beam, and the couple of sessions down there.
Yes.
And then back, well, sometimes I see once a month it was Gators, Bishop's Court, that was at 7 o'clock, so I didn't go down to Auburn on that day. Then Friday, clinical communions.
Okay, in the nursing homes?
In the nursing home.
Yes.
I had a fair few of those. And and then, of course, in the afternoon visiting, and visiting on the other afternoons when I was free. But then sometimes I had meetings in the cathedral and so on, and therefore I didn't do as much visiting as I used to do,
Yes.
because I was not free to do them. Saturday was, of course, relatively free, except for the weddings, which were not terribly eventful. You see, down at Williamstown, we used to have up to 4 weddings a Saturday.
Yes.
And simply because it was the best church
Yeah.
for many miles, and the next come from near and far.
Yes.
And but however, that was that. And then, I regret to say that I'd be preparing a sermon furiously on Saturday night.
Yes, I was going to ask you when you got the time.
Which is against all the rules, of course. But you know, I used to go to choir practice on Thursday night.
Oh, yes.
Of course, to show that I really did appreciate them, that I was interested, and well, you know, if that was the sort of routine.
That's a busy life, isn't it?
Oh well, I'm not saying it was frantically busy, and I slowed down in latter years. But yes, when I was full of vigour, I certainly didn't have much spare time. Apropos when I was at Williamstown, I remember I'd been in England for 3 years, away from home and so on. And when I came back and started in Williamstown, I didn't go to my parents' home once for 8 months.